Welcome to the Fairhaven-Acushnet Magazine, February 10th, 1985. I'm Shawna Pemberton, your host tonight. The first segment is on back problems with Dr. Chester Barron.
Hi, I'm Roz Vieira, reporting for Cable 2. With me today is Dr. Chester Barron, who is a doctor of chiropractic medicine here in Fairhaven. And Doctor, I was wondering if you could tell our viewers what is the most common back problem you get today?
Common back problem I see is the so-called strain, or lumbosacral strain, brought on by excessive bending, trauma, such as accidental strain due to an automobile accident, lifting extra heavy weight, slipping, falling, so forth.
Is there a correct way to pick something up to avoid this problem?
Yes, there is. Actually, that's the best way to overcome a back problem is to prevent it. And prevention is the watchword, so to speak, and the best way of doing this is to lift properly.
And what would be the correct way to lift something?
Well, most people are not prepared to lift the way they should. They're leaning over a radiator to open a window, so to speak. They're bending to the side to lift some heavy object and putting an abnormal amount of stress on one side of the back or the other. In other words, they're not in proper balance to lift. Mm-hmm. That improper balance means improperly placed stress on certain segments of the spine. And what actually happens with a weakened back or a weakened area, may I say right here, most back problems do not happen overnight. They're not happening when a person bends over to pick up a handkerchief or a 5-pound bag of sugar or flour. That backache is usually brought on by weeks or months of, you might say, pre-back problems through fatigue, stress, strain, improper postural habits, improper walking habits, improper exercise habits. The importance of being in balance cannot be overly stressed. The importance of being in proper balance, I think, is the most effective way of preventing a backache. But most of the patients that come in here will readily admit that they were foolish in doing this, foolish in doing that. They've been overly tired and they continue to do so. They may move furniture without waiting for help to move furniture, such as in the housewife moving a refrigerator or a sofa. She's predisposed to that possibly from fatigue. Then she attempts to do this on her own, and before she knows it, she's having a back problem due to this excessive strain or stress upon that particular portion of her body.
Do you get people calling you and telling you they've put their back out? Does your back actually go out?
Well, that's the common term of back going out. What they mean is the back may actually go, certain segments, certain muscle groups of the body go into a spasm. It's a protective mechanism on the part of the body to prevent further injury. Now, when they say that back goes out, what actually happens is a certain amount of slippage that may take place within the bony structure, the vertebra, the spinal column, and then the body, in its attempt to correct this, may cause excessive spasm to take place also. This is a protective mechanism to prevent further injury, and we may be tilted to one side or the other, so I think the phrase is your back has gone out because of that, the deviation from a normal posture.
Mm-hmm. And what about a slipped disc? I mean, do the discs actually slip, and does it look like a disc?
A slip actually slips in a sense, but a slippage is usually what they call a protrusion, where the disc actually is forced out of its normal containment. The disc is contained in a normal sphere within the body between between the vertebrae. Now, when that disc is in a normal position, no pressure, the disc maintains that level. However, if there's an abnormal amount of pressure being placed, say such as abnormal flexion, the disc literally bulges. It's a soft.
This is the disc right here?
In this particular spine here, the disc is in black and felt to signify that it should be a pliable, flexible type of structure. When that structure is placed under a tremendous amount of stress or strain, a bulging may take place, and that bulging, that's what they refer to as a protrusion. The disc may protrude into the opening through which the nerves pass.
So it's more like a rupture, like a ruptured disc?
That protrusion causes pressure. Now, in a ruptured disc or a herniation of the disc, there's a complete breakdown of the structure of the disc, and it may become fragmented. A rupture is an entirely different thing from a disc slip. A rupture is a very serious condition. A slip disc is serious, but not half as serious as a ruptured disc. A ruptured disc usually, most likely, will have to be corrected through surgical intervention, whereas a slip disc, through manipulation, bed rest, and traction, what have you, can be handled 90% of the time, or maybe even more so. Whereas a herniation or a ruptured disc is, in most instances, a surgical procedure to correct.
Am I correct in assuming that, or rather saying that, everything is directly connected to the spine, like certain diseases even, or chronic diseases can be alleviated slightly by some manipulation of the spine?
Well, through chiropractic, let me just put it this way. The brain and spinal cord are the main portions of the central nervous system. The central nervous system then you have the peripheral nervous system. In other words, the nerves leaving the spinal cord to every organ, every cell, every muscle, every area of the body is controlled by the nervous system. Every command from the brain is controlled or transmitted through the nervous system. Any interference in that command respect, or that aspect, I should say, any interference of that command of the nerves to whatever organ they may be going to may cause a dysfunction or some interruption of the normal function of the organ or muscle or what have you. Now, the thing is, if that's carried on for a long period of time, that may cause a problem, say, in the stomach or in the intestine or in the bowel. The impingement that may occur today isn't going to give you a stomach ulcer tomorrow, but if you have a tremendous amount of impingement or interference in the nerve flow or the nerve control over the stomach, which may cause an increased production of acid, that in turn may cause a stomach ulcer. So you see the indirect connection between nerve impingement and ulcers because of the interruption of the nerve force going into the stomach to begin with. And you must realize that every cell in the body is actually controlled, and every control over that cell, every function is controlled through the nervous system.
That's very interesting.
And that's why it's so very important that the nervous system be as intact and as normal as possible. Now, the controversy rages. Now, what is it? I think that our bodies are a balance of chemical, mental, and the physical balance. You must have a chemical, mental, and physical balance. You interrupt the balance in any one of these, and you're going to have disease or a problem.
What do you mean by a chemical balance?
Chemical balance, the normal chemistry of the body. In other words, a certain amount of salt is required or a certain amount of sugar is required. If that imbalance is upset, you know what happens. As far as sugar anyway, sugar metabolism and diabetes results. And then you have the hormonal balance. They are chemicals that are produced in the body, the endomorphins in the brain, what have you. These structures and the hormones, again, that are produced govern the action, reaction, and function of the body. If that's disrupted, that can cause a problem. Physically, if the structural part of the body is disrupted, it may cause a corresponding problem in the physiology of say, a compressed lung due to scoliosis, or a compressed heart due to scoliosis or curvature of the spine. That compression may cause an inhibition in the normal movement of the lung or the heart, which in turn may produce a condition later on in life, such as a heart or lung condition.
So if someone had scoliosis or has scoliosis, they may someday develop asthma or something like that?
That very well could be. That doesn't mean that everyone with scoliosis will develop asthma, but someone someone with scoliosis may develop a problem with the stomach due to the impingement or the compression of the stomach within a smaller area. The lung area, if the person is unable to take a full deep breath due to the distortion of the rib cage, then they are more subject to and susceptible to lung problems. Emphysema, asthma may be a result. There's no definite pattern, but anything that may interfere with the normal functioning of an organ, that organ may react in an abnormal way.
So many people, once they've hurt their back, they're really afraid to do anything, and that is really hurting them more than anything. Wouldn't you say that they should at least do stretches or some type of moderate exercise to get their strength back?
Well, exercise, let me just put one thing. Occasional exercise is worse than no exercise at all. Never exercise occasionally. That's worse than no exercise. Mm-hmm. Exercise should be on a definite schedule, 3 to 4 times a week, in a definite pattern. If professional help can be obtained, such as in some of the spas that they have now, the YMCA, the YW, someone who's proficient in the muscle and exercises and the body exercises, then I'd certainly encourage that particular type of thing. Don't take it upon yourself to do this type of stretch, that type of stretch. And another thing that should be looked into, it just depends on the type of injury to the back. Many back injuries can be corrected. Most people do not realize that a back injury is, as I mentioned before, is the end result of possibly neglect over the years. Mm-hmm. Improper posture as a child, improperly, you might say an improper introduction to sports and weightlifting. Some of these young people are lifting excessively heavy weights to build themselves up at 14, 15. The tissues of the body are not ready to absorb that type of stress. They wreck their knees, they wreck their hips, they wreck the holding elements of the spine. Muscles just move bones. What keeps our spine in line, so to speak, are the ligaments, the cartilage, the tendons. You wreck those as a child, you wreck those in adolescence, and you have a chronic backache for the rest of your life.
A lot of young people are into the breakdancing craze also. Now, what are your opinions, your feelings about that?
Well, my feelings are, I'll just put my personal opinion in. I shudder at the thought, mm-hmm. because the possibility of injury is so great there. It's unbelievable. I myself can't see anything beneficial coming out of a breakdance.
Have you had any children come to you telling you they hurt their neck or something from breakdancing?
Yes, I've had several come in with acute muscle spasms in the neck and shoulder area from directly responsible to breakdancing. Mm-hmm. Naturally, the trauma, the accident is unavoidable, but most of the backaches we see are the chronic backaches that have a backache every other month, every 2 months, every 3, what have you. They keep reoccurring. And actually, when you check these people, you find that they have neglected themselves in many ways. Improperly fitted shoes are one cause of backache. Improper posture. In grade school, I remember being in grade school when I was continuously reprimanded by the teacher. Sit up straight, don't cross your legs, don't twist, don't do this. And I thought she was just an old crab, to be honest. But yet it's so important in the formative years, especially in the formative years, if the youngster realizes that they can prevent backache in future years. Proper posture, proper fitted shoes, stay away from unnecessarily heavy lifting. Weightlifting should be supervised. Never weightlift on your own in the cellar unless it's under a supervised program with someone who knows what he's talking about, mm-hmm. giving you the advice. Don't go out weightlifting on your own. A lot of these young fellas try to lift weights at 14 or 15 that a man of 21, 22 should be doing. Mm-hmm. They're trying to catch up. There's plenty of time to catch up. They could actually wreck themselves to the point to where they'll never catch up. And that's the basis of that. Another thing, many people just do not realize that the strength of the back is equal to the strength of the abdominal muscles. If the abdomen is weak, the stomach muscles, the walls of the abdomen are weak, you're going to be prone to backache. So you've got to realize that if you picture your body from a side view, the abdomen is actually a stabilizing factor to the back. If you have weak abdominal muscles, you have weak back. You can have the strongest muscles in the world in the back. If your stomach muscles are weak, they don't amount to a hill of beans. Proper posture, proper exercise, supervised activity for the youngsters, very important. It's always important. Proper nutrition is very important. The lack of manganese, magnesium, calcium in the growing stages especially, or in the adult, may predispose you to back problems because the muscles may become fatigued so much sooner that they just do not have the strength to maintain the body under the stress in which it's placed. Mental, emotional upsets have a lot to do with backache. People say, well, how in the world can a mental disturbance, a mental activity, or a mental stress give me a backache? If the body is under continuous stress and you're not receiving the proper rest, the fatigue factor sets in. The fatigue factor will set in over a period of weeks or months. Then it reaches the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. That's why a 220-pound truck driver bends over to pick up a dropped comb or wallet, and he throws his back out, so to speak. It's not picking up the comb or his wallet. It's the fact that the muscles in his back and probably the abdomen have reached a point of fatigue where anything will throw it out. And it just so happened that happened at that particular time.
Well, Doctor, you've given us so much information, very useful information, and I'd like to thank you for this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Coming up on the next edition of Fairhaven-Acushnet Magazine, part 2 of the series on how to strengthen your lower back through exercise.
I hope the segment on back problems was very informative. Now coming up is on to how to care for birds in the winter with Kevin Barao and Dave Szleiga.
Hello and welcome to another segment of Pet Tips. We're here on a very, very blustery day at Fairhaven Golden Retrievers once again to show the listeners and our viewers out there how they can help their little feathered friends. We'll start by saying that there are many different types of bird feeders on the market. Some are which are very elaborate, but most of which are inexpensive and do the job just as well as the real fancy type. So maybe we'll start first by showing you that we have here what David has built probably sometime over the time. It's just a general wooden feeder, and it has the basics of the top to keep the snow out of the tray area. And David is feeding sunflower seeds. This is designed for mostly for the larger birds. The other thing that you should know is that, of course, there are different types of birds, and some of them can't really be eating the sunflower seeds. So what you would have is, and I went out to the local discount house and I picked this up. This is about $1.35 for this, and it's a mix of millet and sunflower and grains, and it will fit in most of your feeders that are on the market. One of which is the most common type is something like this. This is a very old one that I had hanging around. I thought I'd bring it in to show you because I was very surprised when I found that indeed they are still common and they are still around. You just fill it up, hang it from a grapevine, a tree, or anything like that, and this will feed a mixture of large and small birds. The other type that we have that folks might be interested in, and I know the kids in the family, if they like birds or whatever, watching birds, they'll get a real kick out of that. That's the window type. It has a small suction on the back, and it attaches to your window. It's a little hard to use in weather this cold. It's designed basically for the spring and summer months, but when it is available, when you can use it, you'll stick it on your window and you'll get to see them really close up. This again is removable. It can be cleaned and put fresh food in there. The other thing that folks should know, and by the way, I went out and bought these things, and I spent a total of $5.50 for the food and the 2 feeders. So it's very, very inexpensive way to feed the birds, and it's something we can all do. And if you really don't have the money to spend on that, there's still one other way, and I'm sure we all have an old garbage top lying around the house somewhere. All you have to do is throw it out on the snow, take your food, put it on there, and the birds would love it just as well, just that way as any fancy feeder. And that's something we can all do.
Is your speech getting frozen, Kevin?
My speech is getting frozen. It is very cold out here, and that's a good point, because that's exactly what we want to show you, is that with all this snow cover, the birds are really having a hard time finding what they need to survive. And that about covers your backyard birds, but we have David here because we're also concerned at this time of the year with ducks and waterfowl and other sorts of those types of birds.
All right, I just want to add a couple things. First of all, the credit of the bird feeder goes to Manny Carrera. I believe he's the one that built it. And it was just very simple. It's nothing fancy. The birds really don't care about the design, I guess, of a bird feed. It's what's in it. It's just a 1/4, I guess, sheet of plywood is what he used, and probably just an additional piece of 2x4 or something. And it's a very simple rig. Like you said, it does provide some cover. And the other thing is, it's important during a snow cover to clear the area where possibly your feeder is. Anything that falls off the feeder will go on the ground. It'll be easier for the birds to come to. And you know, it's funny. Squirrels come to this feeder. Rabbits, I noticed, if you notice the ground, I know there's been rabbits here at night. And getting back to the ducks and the geese, actually the Mass Audubon Society and Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife recommend that we do not feed ducks and geese, because what happens, their normal tendency, or what their normal diet is, vegetation, which, you know, based over many thousands of years, the ecosystems and the birds, this is what they need. It's not, you know, Battle Whip Sunbeam. That's not what they're
okay, so we're not necessarily doing them a favor when we feed them other substances then. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's right, Kevin, because what happens is a lot of people start this at the beginning of the year, and then they decide, you know, to go south maybe for a couple weeks or take a week off in the warmer climate. And these birds are left, basically, the geese and the ducks we're talking about, the waterfowl, migratory birds, are basically left to the elements. And a lot of times, if it's a cold blast like this, they're just going to die. The other thing is they lose their built-in, you know, natural sense of predators around them. They lose all that. They become friendly is what it comes down to, and they just can't fend for themselves to survive this type of weather like they would if they, you know, went on south like they should have. Because what happens, their biological systems, their time clocks go a wire when we've been feeding them, and they just hang on and they stay in. And a lot of them just die a slow death. It's a lot more, to tell you the truth, a brutal way to die than that of, you know, they talk about hunters.
I've heard this same thing said before, and I'm sure anyone who wishes to get in touch with the Audubon can find out more information about that. I guess this is one time we shouldn't really meddle with Mother Nature with the waterfowl.
And the thing is, if you've started doing it and it can become quite expensive, you got to continue now. You know, like I say, a lot of times in the early part of the year when the weather's more enjoyable, the people out there are feeding them, and then it gets brutal. The people go away on vacation, and the birds are basically left to die, is what it comes down to. So if you're doing it now, I'm not saying stop. You know, don't all of a sudden stop feeding the ducks and the geese you've been
feeding. You should continue at this point if you have started.
When the weather comes, then lay off. And the same thing with bird feeding. Once the insects start, you know, they're natural, the best bug mosquito control we have. You know, our feathered friends, if you want to use the term. And you know, you should stop at a certain time of the year. Don't continue, you know, feeding them throughout the year. That's about my, you know.
Okay, that's very good. That is a good point. And if anyone has any questions, they can get in touch with the Audubon Society, and they will give them all the facts and figures that apply to waterfowl and what you should and should not feed, because that is indeed true. I guess that about wraps it up this time. Don't forget your feathered friends. Buy some food. Get it out there. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Kevin. On January 29th and 30th, the Girl Scout Troop number 17 from Acushnet visited our Cablevision. They had a full VIP tour of the facility, including the satellite dishes and the control center called the Head End.
Thank you, Shawna. Welcome to Fairhaven-Acushnet Magazine. I'm Joanne Haaland. With me tonight is a very distinguished guest from this area. He has taught in the Fairhaven and SMU school systems for numerous years, where he was chairman of the English departments, and he is a reviewer for the Standard Times for plays and movies. He's also written numerous books. His last book is entitled The Odd Couple, and The Odd Couple is about Henry Huddleston Rogers and Mark Twain. And what I'd like to ask Mr. Dias is, now Mark Twain, or Henry Huddleston Rogers, a great robber baron of the 19th century, and Mark Twain, more of a humanitarian, they are an odd couple. What made their friendship come
Yes, they are indeed an odd couple, Joanne, no question about that. But they also had a great deal in common. For example, if you look carefully at that picture, you'll notice they looked alike. They both have the lovely mustaches and the nice white bushy hair. They also, of course, had frontier experience. Mark Twain in Nevada and Rogers in the oil fields of Pennsylvania. In addition to that, they loved good cigars, good bourbon. They loved to play billiards. They loved the theater. And they were, above all, fond of practical jokes, of spoofing each other. In addition, both lost beloved daughters when those daughters were very, very young. I think a shared experience that rather cemented the relationship between the two men. In other words, they had actually a good deal in common, although you make a very good point that Mark Twain in his books criticized the materialism in American society. He criticized what he thought were the false values in American society, unquestionably. But Mark Twain also liked money. I think he had a guilty conscience about it. Unfortunately, he wasn't very good in investments. He was always making silly investments. And after he met Henry Rogers, that stopped because Rogers, as you perhaps know, guided his investments and made a great deal of money for him.
That brings me into the next question. It was a quick friendship that developed with Dr. Clarence Rice that brought them together. Now, how did that come about when...
Dr. Rice was physician to both men. And in 1893, Mark Twain returned from Europe, where he had been for a couple of years. And he was in a dreadful state. His publishing company, the C.L. Webster Company, was on the verge of bankruptcy. He had invested $200,000 in a typesetting machine that never got off the ground. He couldn't work. He was unstable mentally. He was irritable. And Dr. Rice was extremely worried about him and decided that maybe he ought to meet somebody, like his other patient, Henry Huddleston Rogers, to see if Rogers might be able to help Mark Twain, to get him out of the doldrums that he was in. And so what he did was set up, he set up a meeting at the Murray Hill Hotel in New York. It was supposed to be an accidental meeting, but it was all planned by Dr. Rice. Rice made this accidental because he wasn't sure whether they would take to each other or not, because supposedly Rogers represented some of the things that Mark Twain was always criticizing. But the two men got on at once. They took to each other, and Mark Twain at that first meeting poured out his heart, more or less, to Henry Rogers. And Henry decided to take Mark Twain in hand. And he got him out of the Webster bankruptcy by making deals with Mark Twain's creditors. And he also got him out of the, I won't go into the details of it because it's maze-like, but he got him out also of the page typesetting machine deal. So everything went along very, very well. And shortly after, Mark Twain went back to Europe to do a lecture tour for 2 years, and he was able in that 2 years to make enough money to pay the rest of the money that he owed, and to take care of his creditors, and all this under the guidance of Henry Huddleston Rogers, who deserves at least a minor footnote, I think, in American literary history, because there's no question in my mind that at that perilous time for Mark Twain, that Henry Rogers literally saved Mark Twain's sanity. And if you can do that for one of the great American writers,